Hey, thank you guys so much. Thank you. Like Matthias said, I am EJ Hassenfratz. I am a freelance motion designer from Denver. Been doing this for about 10 years. Been using Cinema 4D for about 8 years. And I'm completely self-taught. I did not go to school for this. So if I don't know what the heck I'm doing up here, it seems like that, I didn't go to school for this. But anyway, so I've been using it for about 8 years and decided I want to start teaching as well. So there's so many of this community. If you've been here all week long, the artists they bring here is just so phenomenally awesome. And I'm very humbled and honored to be a part of this family here. But everyone's been so good at sharing their knowledge. So I was like, you know what? About 5 years ago, I want to help give back, and just kind of got addicted to kind of opening people's eyes to the possibility of Cinema 4D. So if you're watching this presentation and you're like, oh, I want to know more about all this stuff, I have like over 150 tutorials on iDesign.com here. Next Monday, starts my Cinema 4D Bootcamp class on schoolofmotion.com, where we take you from zero to hero, not knowing anything about 3D, all the way to hopefully feeling very, very solid in the world of 3D. So that really pumped about that. And I also have an ongoing weekly series that's been going on for a little over a year now on lynda.com called MoGraph Weekly. Every week is like a nice 10-minute, very easily digestible tutorial. And again, it updates every week. So if you're not sick of me by the end of this this presentation, go find, there's plenty of more learnings on there. Also my Twitter, YouTubes, and dribbles and all that good stuff. So why am I here? Why am I spreading the love of Cinema 4D? Well, I truly believe it's one of the easiest 3D softwares to learn. It's the fastest way you can get into 3D. And I think if you've been here all week, you've been seeing how crazy it is that you can make very complex looking animations with just a few clicks of the button because of the tool set in Cinema 4D. So that's really what got me addicted. And I think as well, if you've been paying attention all week, there's been so many different styles and so many different ways people are using Cinema 4D to do whatever they need to do to make their clients happy. So that was also a huge point for me, and especially the ability to turn 3D into 2D style illustrative pieces by just turning on what's called Sketch and Tune, which is a renderer, which I'll cover a little bit later. And personally for me, Cinema 4D has been great because it really allowed me in a point in my career where I kind of pivoted from one kind of creative path to another. It allowed me to refocus my efforts and kind of reinvent myself as an artist. So it really has a soft spot for me as far as the software goes. So my career, how I got started using Cinema 4D was I was working in a local TV news station, first in Pittsburgh and then DC, so ABC, NBC, and animated a bunch of 3D logos, so 3D ABC logos and stuff like that. So that's how I kind of integrated 3D into my After Effects workflow, is just 3D type, where this is early 2000s, so you extrude a piece of type, everyone's like, holy crap, it's 3D now. It's not 2D flat, So that was kind of my first foray. Then I went freelance and started working on a bunch of local sports teams in DC, like the NHL team, NHL, NFL, MLB, all that stuff, and started animating, those sports logos. So I got to the point where I was like, you know what? No more logos. I kind of got creatively stale just kind of animating logos time in and time out. And I was like, well, you know what? What do I do now? So I decided, I'm just going to start watching tutorials and see what kind of sticks. And that was I didn't have a direction going. So that really didn't help me all that much. So I kind of got to this realization and kind of did some self-reflection of I've been kind of chasing the rabbit for so long that I never really learned, like I said, I'm self-taught. So I never really learned how to animate correctly or really how to do good color theory or good design fundamentals. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to step back and I'm going to refocus my efforts on that. And Cinema 4D was the thing that really allowed me to kind of strip away all of the maybe more advanced 3D topics and just focus on color, composition. Design is just form and shapes, right? If you put a 2D material on a 3D object, it's no longer a sphere, it's a circle. And those are all the elements of basic design, right? So if you're from 2D, and how many people out there are just new to 3D? Everyone's kind of, okay, so a lot of people here familiar with 3D though? Okay, all right. But this kind of allowed me to also do 2D, so also attract clients that maybe are attracted to 2D styles, and I can stay in the application that I love the most. So when I started, I kind of, again, stripped away all of the more advanced 3D topics, used cell shader and the sketch and tune render, which turns everything, your 3D geometry into tune shaded. And I started animating little inanimate objects like this burger, and just kind of gave it personality. I found that was really, really fun to do, to breathe life into like a simple sphere, give it some personality. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to take this one step further. I'm going to add some eyeballs and a mouth and give it even more personality. I was like, okay, so a little bit of character animation here. And I was like, I kind of like character animation. I'm going to put some arms and legs on like all these inanimate objects and really get a little bit more down the path of character animation as well. And then again, this was all 3D, so I started learning Octane as well. So all the things that I build for like my 2D, I can bring it into Octane, put in some really nice, realistic Octane materials, and it looks like a vinyl toy with just, you know, switching out some textures. So because of Cinema 4D, it allowed me to realize this new creative path of like going maybe a little bit in the character animation arc and more 2D styles. And it really allowed me to work on some really great work for like Microsoft and stuff like that, clients I would have never imagined I would work on, especially if I just had a bunch of, a reel with a bunch of, you know, logos on it. And again, the tool set, the versatility of what Cinema 4D can do was such a huge, huge part of my career path. So I owe a lot to this software. So just to give you an idea of the type of work that I've been working on over the past few years, demo real time. Thank you. So a large variety of work there, and you can see a lot of that's actually 2D, but all of that was made inside of Cinema 4D, so very, very little After Effects work. So a little bit about what I'm going to be demoing today, and actually this is kind of a continuation of the presentation I gave on Monday, so if you want to kind of catch the first half, be sure to go on to cineversity.com. They're going to archive all of the videos that have been going on all week, and they're going to put that up. Usually, they're very, very fast about it, usually with like in a week and a half. But I'm going to continue on and go into more of my easy character animation workflow. So how many people out there would love to get into character animation but are very intimidated by like, you know, the complexities of like IK and stuff like that? So quite a few people out there. Good, awesome. A lot of people out there. So what I want to do today is kind of start by demystifying that character animation has to be complicated, and especially in a 3D application. So I'm going to kind of guide you along. Hopefully by the end, you're going to be equipped with all the knowledge you need to go home and animate your own hamburgers when you get home, all right? So, and then at the very end, if I have time, I'm going to do some just general time-saving workflow tips that really helped me along with some very big projects I worked on with multiple agencies at once. All right, enough keynote. Let's get in the real deal. So here is a little penguin. If I render this, you're going to see this is Sketch and Tune basically here. Sketch and Tune creates turns your 3D geometry into nice tune shaded geometry or 2D pieces of illustrative art, and also allows you to put outlines around your object as well. And you can get very, very organic with it, make it look very kind of hand-drawn. But anyways, this is a animated character walk cycle, right? This is you know, very simplistic character, but this is all done by a combination of a handful of effectors here. So basically all I have that's animated without effectors is this little flappy wing thing. And this was done very, very easily by using what's called a pose morph. And basically what I can do is just kind of take the points of any geometry, right? So here's my basic mesh, and can record different states of an object, okay? So I'm wanting to record all the point information and store it in different poses. So the one pose is going to be where his flippers are down, and the one is going to be where the flippers are up. And I basically just, selected all of these polygons on the flipper and just kind of rotated it up and just stored that in that state, okay? And then you just animate the strength between those two, and you get this nice flapping animation, all right? So pose morph did that, and then basically a whole bunch of these effectors. And if I kind of go one by one, let me just get out here. There we go. Just one by one, I'm building up the walk cycle, all right? So just a bunch of effectors. So let me just break down how I kind of stacked all that stuff up. So here's just my penguin again. He's just got the flapping animation from that pose morph. And let's add some deformers here. So let's go ahead and start with our Bend Deformer. And let's just make this a, we're going to place in the same level of geometry because I'm not a very good modeler at all. So all of these little pieces here, like the eyes and the mouth, are kind of separate. I'm not that good of a modeler to make it all one cohesive piece of geometry, but that's okay. You don't have to be a good modeler to be a character modeler or animator. But here's my Bend Deformer, and I'm going to place it in the same level of hierarchy as all of my objects. So when I adjust this, it's going to affect all of my objects. If I just had this a child of my just penguin body here, one thing you're going to notice is that the symmetry object that's creating the geometry is all messed up, and it's not moving the eyes or the mouth. So keeping the same level of hierarchy is very important. Now it's going to make it just deform as one cohesive mesh. And what I'm going to do with this Bend Deformer is put this right at the bottom of his feet, okay? So if I bring up my 4-up view, I'm just going to position it right at the base of his feet. So when I go ahead and animate that strength, it looks like he's waddling, okay? So that was a big part of the waddle. And then to kind of make it look like he's stepping, backwards and forwards. And actually, if you just animated this, he's a penguin. This could have worked for a walk cycle. But if I wanted to make it that he was putting one foot in front of the other, I just used a twist deformer here. So I'm just going to bring this down in here. Again, I'm going to place this at the very bottom of his feet, or like towards the bottom of his feet, and just adjust the bounding box size. So the bounding box is basically the area in which the object gets deformed. And if I just twist the angle, you see that it's actually twisting the top side of the object. If I just hit my R key, rotate this 180 degrees, and make the twisting at the bottom of the object, you can see we're kind of, he's moving his hips, kind of stepping back and forth. And if you combine these two Bend Deformers together, the Bend Deformer and the twist together, you can kind of make him kind of walk forward. And then I finished it off with a really cool effector called Squash and Stretch. That is probably one of my favorite animation fundamental properties to add to an animation. And basically how the Squash and Stretch works, it's really, really easy. You have this little bracket here, little top and bottom bracket. You just position these at the base in the top of your object. So if I go and just adjust this top, you can see the little boop, little brackets popping out the top of his head. You just define the top and bottom of your geometry, and then adjust the factor. Whoa! And really have some really nice, very appealing kind of accentuated animation with the Squash and Stretch. And say if you didn't want to have him squash and stretch from the center of his body, where he kind of flattens out, you want him to squash from the bottom, right? So what we're going to do is just move the bottom, right? So the bottom's right there. We're just going to move this up. So he actually squashes from the bottom and just move this down to the bottom of his feet, and then readjust that top. And now instead of squashing and stretching from the center of the object, it's going to actually squash from the bottom. So you get this really cool squash and stretch. So if I combine a bunch of these deformers again, let me just build this up. So here's a shear, and you can see that's kind of just moving the hips back and forth. And then the twist, that's kind of making his feet kind of go one in front of the other. And then I add another twist for the upper body, and you can see all of these little, deformer boxes kind of stacking up as well. And here's a bend to kind of give the, the walk a little bit of weight and have his top half kind of sway. And then I added another bend to even accentuate and add a little bit of the follow through and over exaggeration. And then add right on top the Squash and Stretch, because with the Squash and Stretch, it just adds so much more character and personality and whimsicalness, that's a word, right? I'll take questions at the very end, to build this really cool character. So all deformers, all right? So that was no rigging whatsoever. So if you do have a simplified character like this, you don't need to be a really crazy animator that works at Disney to do something like this, right? So that's kind of the bare bone basics. Let's go into some actual IK rigging, kind of dispel the complexities of what might be IK. So here's a little character here. And basically what I want to do is rig this character together. So the sock kind of, he's running, chasing around, trying to find his other sock, because you always lose one, right? You don't know where the heck it goes. So he's searching for his friend. And I want this to look like a floppy little sock. So I just rigged this very simply and added dynamics to it. And if you don't know what dynamics is in Cinema 4D, it basically applies physics forces to your objects by applying like gravity and stuff to them. So let's just kind of break down very simple rigging techniques. So here's my sock geometry, and I'm just going to make some IK. So right now, this object has no bones. So it's almost like if you had no bones, you'd be a jellyfish and just fall to the floor, right? So we need to give it some kind of form, some kind of joint system. So we're going to go to the character menu and just use the joint tool. And to add joints, I'm just going to hold the command key down and build a joint here. And two joints can create one joint, like 2 points create a line. And then basically you want to think of bones and joints as how you want something to bend. So I actually want this top half of the sock to kind of bend smoothly, like a curve. I don't want it to bend sharply like your arm and your elbow, because your arm is made up of 2 bones, right? But your finger is made up of 3, and it has a much curvier bend. So what I'm going to do is actually just create a few bones to make this a much curvier bend, okay? And there we go. These are all my joints. And what I'm going to do is then build an IK relationship, which means that instead of having to rotate each of these to create a pose, I actually just create something, one object, where it'll actually edit everything. Kind of like when you move your hand, it moves the rest of your arm. And that's called IK, or Inverse Kinematics. So I'm going to set that up, and it's very easy to do. You just select the first joint in your joint chain and the last joint, and you just go to Character, Commands, Create IK Chain. Boom. Super easy. Now, this creates a goal. And again, think of the goal as your hand. Wherever you move your hand, the rest of your arm goes. Wherever I move my goal, the rest of this joint system moves as well. So this is a really easy way to be able to move all of those joints with just one single object, right? So now you're going to see that, great job, EJ. This is not doing anything. Your little sock's not doing crap. Well, that's because you need to build the relationship between those joints and the geometry. You need to add something else. And what that something else is a deformer. So just like I was showing you deformers before, the bend and stuff like that, there's something called a skin deformer that if I select all of my joints and then select the geometry I want to bind and have those joints be connected to, I just go to Character, Commands, and Bind. You're going to notice we now have this skin deformer here. And basically, that creates a relationship between all of those joints and our geometry. So now, when I move this sock, or move this goal, it's actually deforming and adjusting and moving around my sock. Now, this is actually a really good way if you just want to model. So say if you have something where you're like, I just want to have this, maybe the sock kind of bend like that, and that's all I want to do. That's some form of modeling. You're not animating at all. But what I want to do is have this set up so when this kind of sock character is jumping up and down, let me just group all this stuff together, that when he's jumping up and down, this little part kind of flops, right? And I want to do that without setting a bunch of keyframes or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is go into my Dynamics tag, or my IK tag, sorry, and go to the Dynamics tab. So again, Dynamics applies physical forces to your geometry. If I just turn that on and hit play, you're going to see that this just kind of flops down. And if I move this around, you're going to see, oh, man, we got some really floppy top of the sock going on there. And what's going on is that this goal is trying to kind of keep this last joint in place. So what I'm going to do is just delete that goal. And now you can see that our sock flops freely. And what I can do now is go Command D. And in my Dynamics options here, we have a default gravity. I can just turn this off altogether, right? And now this can flop a little bit more freely without gravity affecting it. We can go into the Dynamics tab and kind of adjust the strength of our dynamics, how much drag or friction there is, how much rotation hold, or how much it wants to maintain that original rotation position or rotational angle, and then also how much it maintains its positional hold. So you see if I bring this all the way down, it just kind of melts. But you can add some really cool effects by just bringing these values down ever so slightly, and now it looks like it's a sock underwater, something like that. And what's actually happening is, let me just go to frame 0. I don't want this main sock joint to be applied with the dynamics. So what I'm going to do is just move this IK tag down, and now only this top joints right here are going to have that floppy movement. So now you can see just the top is flopping around. I can rotate this around like that and get some really nice floppy movement. So that's all it took. If I just animated this character, all that secondary animation was automatic, no extra keyframes whatsoever. So let me just show that end result again. There we go. Well, actually, let me just show the actual end file. There we go. So you can see that floppy motion, no keyframes. That's just me keyframing this actual sock group and creates all that dynamic movement. So IK, very, very simple to set up to be able to create joints and bind them together. But let's go and say you're like, oh, okay, IK is a little bit confusing to me. Let's kind of simplify it even more. Let's demo how I animated this little sleepy bear and rigged up like all the arms and the legs and stuff like that. So a little bit more of a complex character than just a sock. We actually have arms and legs here like a typical biped. So let's go in here, and you can see how I set up all this rigging here. And very, very easy. I got all my goals and stuff. I just want to break down very quickly how I set this up, all right? And if you want to know more, I go way more in depth about this technique on my website. So definitely check out all that stuff. I'm just going to go in here. There's the arm. OK, so here's my arm. I'm just going to rig it very easily. I'm not going to use the joints. I'm going to use splines. So we all know how to use splines, right? Very easy. So what I'm going to do is just like I laid joints, I'm going to lay a spline. So we're going to have one at the shoulder, right? And then we're going to have another point right where the elbow would be, and then one point right at the base of like the hand, all right? And what I'm going to do is then give the Cinema 4D a little bit of a hint as to where that elbow is going to bend initially. So all I'm going to do is just move this point in the middle just a little bit behind here, okay? So I want the elbow to actually point back if this actually bent. So what I'm going to do is set up that IK system using a spline. So what I'm going to do is right-click on my spline. Let me just rename this arm spline. Right-click, go to character tags, and we're going to use that same IK tag that was applied to our joints. And go ahead, and we're going to use point IK. And what this is going to do is use this spline as a joint system. So all you need to do is define the start point. And it actually doesn't start from 1, it starts at 0. So we have 3 points. So this is point 1, that's our first, or point 0. This is our first point. This is point 1, and this is point 2. So all you have to do is define your first and your last point. So our last point's 2. So I'm just going to do N. You can see this green line just comes up here. And that's basically says there's a relationship between that first point and the last point. And then what I'm going to do is just add that goal. So just like we had the goal, again, the goal is the hand. Here's my goal. Let me just do, let's just rename this arm goal. There we go. And now I can move this around. And you can see I'm moving my spline, again, but this is not doing anything to my actual geometry because, again, we need to have a deformer to deform our actual object. So instead of a skin deformer, I'm going to use a spline wrap. Everyone's used spline wrap before. Very, very awesome thing. Be able to deform geometry along a spline. So I'm just going to make this a child of my arm. And then the spline I'm going to use is that arm spline. Okay? Now what's going to happen is when I move this goal, I'm now bending this arm. And I can bend this down. And what if I wanted to have him wave, though, right? That's not a wave. I don't know where you come from that you consider that a wave. So what we need to do something else. We need another thing to determine where our elbow is pointing. And what that's called in character rigging is a pole. So a pole is just basically where your elbow is pointing to. So let's just go into that IK tag, and we're just going to say add pole. And there it is right there. And one thing I like to do is, so I'm not just kind of clicking around in here trying to find where everything is to give all these nulls that are our goals and our poles some other different kind of display mode, because this is just a dot. Let's give this a pyramid and just make this a little bit bigger and have this face, let's do XY, yeah. And we'll just move this back. So now I can easily just click in my viewport and grab that. So basically you can see wherever I'm moving my pole is where my elbow is going. So now I can move this pole down, move my goal up, and you can see now I can have him wave. And that's just because to do real character animation, you need to move the goal or where the hand is and then also determine where the elbow is. So just two things to keep in mind when you are actually animating an arm. So there we go. So very, very easy way to set stuff up like that. So that's like basic, like how hard was that? Not hard at all. So let's go back into our the bear start here. And you can see I have my arm rigged. I have my goals and my poles. You can see the poles back here, determining where our elbows are pointing. I got my feet rigged as well. You can do some river dance or something. I don't know. And but the one problem is we have this set up, right? And it's not like a hamburger character. We actually have a bear that has a neck and has a body, but right now we just rig the arms and the legs. So if I move this around, he just looks very stiff. Looks like he rode the roller coaster at New York, and got whiplash, and I was like, can't move his neck anymore, like I did on Monday when I actually rode that dang thing. But so we want to go a little bit further step and rig up the actual body so it can bend and his neck can move and stuff like that. So we're going to do something very similar to what I just showed you, where we use a spline and use Spline Wrap to deform the character, but we're also going to bring in some joints to help us along as well. So let's just start by creating a spline, all right? And we're going to start at the bottom, and we're just going to start at the very bottom of the body. And remember, wherever a point is where a pivot point or a bend will be. So we want to put one right about here where the neck would be, okay? And then one right at the tippy top of the head. And let's just name this spline body spline, all right? And now we're going to go and get our spline wrap. Actually, let's first go and apply IK to it, right? So let's go right-click, character, IK, turn on point IK, and again we have 3 points. So the first point, 0, then 1, then 2. So it goes to the top, got that green line connecting the top and the bottom of the top. There's that relationship there. And let's go ahead and bring our spline wrap down. And here's our body, and again, I'm a horrible modeler, so all of these are separate objects. That's totally fine, still works. And bring our spline wrap here. And now all I have to do is define what spline I want to be used in the spline wrap, and that's the body spline, so I'll just drag and drop that down. And you're going to see, perfect, let's ship this to the client. No, we have to change a few options here. Right now, the orientation's in the positive X, and we actually need it to be in the positive Y, so it's up straight. So we're just going to turn that to Y. And then he's actually twisted around, so we actually need to go a little bit step further and go to the rotation and just adjust the up vector. And this is the X, Y, and Z. And basically, if you ever do a spline wrap and you're like, this doesn't look right, play around with these little options. And you can see if I just put a 1 in my up vector for X, it kind of snaps into place. So now when I go ahead and click my spline points in here, you can see we're actually moving the neck. If I select the first point on the head here, let's get my rectangular selection. I can move this down, right? And this is all well and good, but when I bend this over, the arms are just kind of staying stationary. The hip is staying stationary as well. And there's really no way to animate these points there. So what we need to do is create just like I created nulls that were goals and poles, I need to do that, create some kind of controls that when I move those controls, I can actually move these points on this spline. So what I'm going to do is actually make some joints based on this spline. And we can do that very easily by selecting whatever spline you have and going to Character, Conversions, and we're just going to convert that spline to joints. Okay? So when I click that, you're going to see that we have those 3 points. Those 3 points are converted to 3 joint points, and we basically have 2 or 3 joints here. Okay? So what I need to do now is create that relationship between this spline and these joints, and that's going to be that connection is going to be created by right-clicking on my joint and going to Character Tags and going to IK Spline. All right. So not IK, but IK Spline, and this allows us to do a couple things. It allows us to define a spline that we want to drive, and that's our body spline here. And then we also have to choose what is the end joint of the joint chain that we want to be kind of bound together with that spline we created. And this is the last joint here. Okay? And let me just name these joints so they're not just joint, joint, joint. You always want to name things so you know what the heck is going on. So this will be, like the waist. Yeah, I spelled that right. Sweet. And then the neck. And then the head. All right? So now I can go into the handles, and basically handles are like controllers. So I'm just going to add 3. So 1, 2, 3. And remember those indexes. So index 0 is that first point right at the waist. The index 1 is that neck one. And then index 2 is the very top. And now I'm just going to create some controls or some nulls. So I'm going to hit create 3 times, and it's going to automatically create these nulls that are going to correspond with the different parts of my body here, which is really cool. So this is my waist. Null. Weight, not weight. Weight. Waist. There we go. I'm an artist, not a speller. I'm not a writer. And then there's the neck. And then the head. Okay. So when I move the head, you can see it's moving that top joint. And the great thing about this is because I'm using Spline Wrap with fit to spline mode on, it's actually a built-in kind of squash and stretch, which is super cool. And you're going to see that it's kind of a sharp point. And that's because that spline I built is pretty linear. If I just change this to a different type of smoother spline, like B-spline or a Kima, you're going to see that's going to smooth out. Okay? So I can move this head around. Move the beat around. So we're going to just kind of move that all over the place. And you can see that's actually, moving my, my joints as well. So let me, I think I accidentally undid that Akima thing. There we go. I just chose that one because it's fun to say. I'm not actually sure what it does. But now what we need to do, that's all well and good that we can move this around, but you can see that our arms are just sitting there. And our legs are just sitting there too. When I move the waist, nothing's happening, right? So what I actually need to do is, here's my leg splines. I'm just going to make that a child of the waist. And now you can see when I move this, it's kind of moving stuff around. And you can see that it's actually moving my joints. I'm going to go in here into my body spline, or actually my IK spline. And we have different modes where the bone or the joints kind of fit. I actually want this to just be relative. So what that means is that when we stretch out the head, it actually stretches out the joints. So see how the joints are getting bigger? If I had this at its fit, you're going to see that when I move this, that joint just stays stationary, and that can kind of cause troubles, and go to, we're just going to keep that relative. So it's going to actually stretch along with our geometry, okay? So when I move my waist, it's actually moving my legs. But again, we need to have this with the arms. So that's one way to kind of build relationships, is just making objects a child of controllers. And while I'm talking about controllers, let me actually just change these to circles. So we can actually just grab these guys here. And I'm not going to have this orientate to the camera. Let's do X and Y. So now I can just easily go in here and grab the head, right? And grab the hip by just grabbing that controller. and then grab the neck by just grabbing that neck controller. So basically, I need to have the arms here move along with that the neck controller. So instead of making it a child, and here's my arm controls, you can see right there. Instead of making this a child of the neck, I'm just going to do it another way and have what's called a constraint. So a constraint, if I right-click here and go to Character Tags, Constraint, what this allows you to do is basically parent objects to other objects without needing to make them a child of that object. So you don't need to like dig through a hierarchy to find stuff. You can keep it at like base level. So I'm just going to click Parent and go into the Parent tag, and I'm just going to use that, let's see, the neck as the target, all right? So now when I move the neck, it's moving the arms, and you're seeing a little bit of like lag happening, and this is because of priorities. And just like in real life, you want to make sure you have your priorities straight, or you end up in Vegas, passed out somewhere. So get your priorities straight. And what that means is that Cinema 4D adds effects. The dad jokes are free, like I said in my first presentation. As Cinema 4D goes through the object list, it's executing all the functions. So like in After Effects, if you have a glow and then a blur effect, it's going to glow and then blur. But typically you want to blur and then glow. So it all depends on the order of execution. So basically what's happening is we need to go into these little constraint tags and just up this expression priority further on down the line, all right? So now when I move the neck, you're going to see that we no longer have that issue, okay? But the problem is when I'm moving my arms, and you're seeing that this is kind of distorting at the top, and I accidentally made the spline a little bit too tall from the head. So just make sure when you're putting the points down, you're putting it right at the top and not over, because it can cause issues like this. But you're seeing when I'm moving the head, my arms are just kind of staying stationary, and if I rotate this, the arms are rotating independently of the neck, so that's not good, right? That doesn't look very good. But notice when I move this controller, it's actually bending this bone. So what's really cool is that instead of making this a parent of the neck null, I'm going to make this a parent of the neck bone here, or joint here. Now watch what happens when I move my neck. You're going to see that this actually rotates those arms, and it's going to rotate based on the rotation angle of my joint there. So now it looks a little bit more better, which is the official term for that. But again, so we got the waist going, we got the neck. We can even parent the waist to the neck. So when I move this, he's kind of swaying back and forth. I can move the waist independently, have him do a booty shake or something like that. But you're going to see that we now built, just using that really easy spline and spline wrap workflow, to be able to actually rig up a body. So this is just a bear, but you could use this with an actual cartoonish human figure or something like that, because you now know how you can distort and manipulate the body of a character the same way you can easily do like the rubber hose style. Anyone knows the rubber hose from After Effects? Like that rubber hose style of really easy rigging, and be able to do it with your body there. So again, here's that bear again. And the really cool thing about this workflow is because with traditional rigging, you have to like weight everything based on the actual mesh that you're using. But since we're using deformers, something that's really cool, and I actually forgot to show this when I showed you the little penguin guy. Let's go ahead and here we go. So here's just a pre-rigged one, right? And here's the head and the neck, all that good stuff. Since we're using a spline wrap, and let's actually, let's just grab this. Let's grab this pair, okay? Let's grab that. I'm going to copy and paste this here, and then I'm just going to paste it into this this project, and place this in the body here. And basically, because we're using a deformer, let me just delete the snout, the eyes, and the body of my bear, and just scale up my body here. let's see. Basically, you can see you can bring in a whole nother object and move this around. I just need to scale all this stuff up. Let's go to object mode. There we go. There we go. And that's all intact. Like, I don't need to weight anything. I have all this rig set up, so you can save this rig, put in your hamburger, put in your pear. If you actually have a humanoid figure, put that in there. But this is already rigged. You already set it up. Because we're using deformers, you don't have to re-weight things based on different types of geometry. So this is a really quick way to iterate. Like, if you're working on a project for a client, and we're like, we need 12 different characters, right? And you're like, holy crap. Oh, we need it by the end of the week, too. And you're like, oh, great. All you got to do is set up this one rig and then just replace the geometry, like the actual body geometry. Again, we can switch out the arms because, again, we can just switch out the arm geometry. So here's the arm geometry here. We can easily switch that out with something else, and a different arm style or something like that. So really, really cool stuff. Another cool thing that is really nice to be able to do is, say we're in Vegas, I stay at the MGM, they have boxing, right? What if we want to make this a boxing bear? Maybe you want to have the rubber hose style and actually have a hand on top that you animate individually as a separate object. So what I can do if I want to have that, and for this example, I'm just going to have a boxing glove. Basically, all I'm going to do is go ahead and clone this boxing glove and use the object mode here in the cloner and just choose, let's see, this right arm group spline. Let's find out where the controller is. There we go. So there's the right arm spline. So I want to clone this boxing glove onto the arm spline. And you're going to see, boom, I can offset this. And basically, I want to offset this to the very end of that spline. Not too far. It'll snap back to the beginning of the spline. But watch what happens. I slid this glove on. Let's go to this controller. And I move this arm around. You can see he's now champion, heavyweight champion of the world. Boxing glove. So, like, think of, if this was a different hand, you can actually animate that hand separately as well and clone it onto this spline, which is really, really cool. So you can actually take that rubber hose concept, rig the body, rig a hand, and just clone it onto the end of the spline, and bam, you got a pretty complex character without any actual traditional rigging or weighting at all. All right, so that's kind of how you can rig up a body, right? Let's do mouths. So here's a here's our burger man. So basically how I make mouths with the style characters that I make is basically just a sweep object, right? And here's the mouth, and it's just basically made up of a spline. We're sweeping a circle around this mouth spline here. And remember how I showed you how I used the pose morph tag to create the arms flapping, and basically it stores different poses of whatever you want? That's basically how I animate my mouth. So if I right-click on my mouth, go to character tags, pose morph, basically, pose morph morphs between stored poses, and you can store whatever states of an object you want. So we have a lot here. Position, scale, rotation, points, parameters, all this good stuff. Basically, all I want to do is store all the points moving that I'm moving on the actual points of my object as he's talking along with me. And I'm just going to store the points, and that will dump me into the tag tab. And I got my base pose, which is the default pose that you started with, and it's going to automatically create a new pose for you. And let's just make this, I'm going to double click and just rename this mouth open. And I'm just going to move this down. And I can go into my kind of front view here and like really fine tune this if you really want to. You can have them super surprised or whatever you want. Okay, and that's a stored pose. All of those point level changes I stored in that one pose. Whoops. So like that. And now all I have to do is just go ahead, and you can see as I'm moving the strength slider of that mouth open, it's basically morphing between that base pose, the default pose, and the open pose. So if I go into animate, I can then set keyframes on the strength of that mouth open pose and have him talk, setting keyframes, which is pretty cool. But taking this one step further, say you have a lip sync track, and I actually worked on a project where it was like 40 seconds of VO, and again, very tight timeline, of course. I feel like that's every project anymore. But say you needed to animate that mouth over 40 seconds. And by the way, this is like a rough VO track, so it's not the actual final track. So it's like, well, I don't want to waste all the time actually hand keyframing this to a timing that's going to be completely off. What I'm going to do is actually use another method to do this, and it's actually very clever. Me and Matt, we're over on Skype, Matt from Brograph.com. We're on Skype, and they were working on a project for Rick and Morty, some crazy stuff, and we're brainstorming on how can we automate voiceovers, because to hand keyframe it would have taken forever, and again, tight timeline. We came up with this really cool method of actually using a cloner in a very creative way and a sound effector to be able to drive different states of an object. So just like I showed you how you can have two different states of an object, like the closed state and the open state. And again, these are just two separate objects. And you can see if I clone this 10 times, it's just iterating between the closed state, open state, closed state, open state. But what I actually want to do is use blend. And something very interesting happens when you choose blend is that depending on how many steps you have, it actually blends between the closed mouth state and the open mouth state by however many steps you put in the count here. So basically, I just want a count of 2. So this is just going to blend between an open pose and a closed pose, okay? And let's actually just make this a count of 1 because I only want one mouth. But it's going to be blending between some states. So what we can now do is use an effector to help drive what strength between the initial pose and the second pose. And the sound effector is actually really, really cool with that. If I just hit play, I have a soundtrack already loaded up, but I have this sound effector turned off, so you won't see it yet, or you won't hear it yet, but you're going to see the waveform, okay? So what you can do is actually sample the waveform, and the waveform, like the amplitude or the volume of the sound, can actually drive the strength between the closed mouth state and the open mouth state. So let me just go ahead, go to frame 0. Here's my cloner. Just make sure that I have the sound effector in there. And let's just turn this on, okay?
This is literally the best presentation I have ever listened to. Great job, EJ.
Thank you, Burger Man. So, like, how cool is this? You can have, like, that was just me in my hotel room a few nights ago. I don't actually sound like that. I didn't, like, inhale helium or anything. Cool, like, online voice converter. But I have that, and it's basically driving the strength between the open state and the closed state because we have that cloner set to blend. So it's actually smoothly blending between those two the two mouth states, which is really, really cool. So again, I use this to animate a mouth lip sync for 40 seconds of VO. And this was so helpful because, again, you get a rough scratch. And for whatever reason with clients, you get only a week to do a crazy minute-long animation, but the VO guy gets all the time in the world to just talk for 40 seconds, right? So like that was kind of the workflow. But this workflow really saved Matt and myself for sure, doing this kind of really cool lip sync. And you could switch this out with different audio and have it drive different stuff. So let me just load a different sound here. There we go. So here's just a less fun.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
So you can adjust like the strength of this overall. So let me just crank up the strength. So the blend is actually more pronounced.
Jumps
so you can see the mouth actually moves a lot more strongly by adjusting the strength here. Yeah.
The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.
So like that was so helpful for me. But that's going to be it. I'm just running out of time. But hopefully, who feels a little bit more confident? Like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do some characters. Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to achieve with this presentation. But again, I just kind of covered basic stuff. I go way more in depth on my website. I got a lot of rubber hose rigging tutorials where I actually go through the creation process of both arms, both legs, a little bit more in depth. Again, if you want to check out, and if you're new to 3D, those of you watching on the internet, C4D Bootcamp, 8 weeks jam-packed full of C4D knowledge, gets you from not knowing any 3D at all to rocking it in Cinema 4D. And again, MoGraph weekly series on Lynda.com. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to always hit me up on Twitter. I'm on Twitter way too much. when I should be sleeping and stuff. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them on there. Again, EJ Hassenfratz, thank you guys so much for coming out here. And thank you, Maxon, for having me here as well.